Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects by Giorgio Vasari.
Life of Michelangelo Buonarroti, Part 5. There had entered into the service of Paul IV, and also into the church of the Fabric of San Pietro, the architect Piero Logorio, and he was now once more harassing Michelangelo, going about saying that he had sunk into his second childhood. Wherefore, angered by such treatment, he would willingly have returned to Florence, and having delayed to return, he was again urged in letters by Giorgio, but he knew that he was too old, having now reached the age of 81. Writing at that time to Vasari by his courier, and sending him various spiritual sonnets, he said that he was come to the end of his life, that he must be careful where he directed his thoughts, that by reading he would see that he was at his last hour, and that there arose in his mind no thought upon which was not graved the image of death. And in one letter he said, quote, "It is God's will, Vasari, that I should continue to live in misery for some years. I know that you will tell me I am an old fool to wish to write sonnets, but since many say that I am in my second childhood, I have sought to act accordingly. By your letter I see the love that you bear me, and you may take it as certain that I would be glad to lay these feeble bones of mine beside those of my father, as you beg me to do. But by departing from here, I would be the cause of the utter ruin of the Fabric of San Pietro, which would be a great disgrace and a very grievous sin. However, when it is so firmly established that it can never be changed, I hope to do all that you ask me, if it be not a sin to keep in anxious expectation certain gluttons that await my immediate departure." Close quote. With this letter was the following sonnet, also written in his own hand, translated by Google Translate. "Arrived is already the course of my life, with stormy sea for a fragile boat, at the common port where to render one's crosses account and reason for every sad and pious work. Waves the affectionate fantasy that art made me an idol and a monarch. I know now how much error was charged, and what everyone desires so badly of him. The amorous thoughts will already be vain and happy. What, Signor, if I approach too dead? Of one I know for sure, and the other threatens me. Neither painter nor sculpt is more than quiet. The soul turns to that divine love, who opened his arms to take us on the cross." End of translation. Whereby it was evident that he was drawing toward God, abandoning the cares of art on account of the persecution of his malignant fellow craftsmen, and also through the faults of certain overseers of the fabric who would have liked, as he used to say, to dip their hands into the chest. By order of Duke Cosimo, a reply was written to Michelangelo by Vasari in a letter of few words, exhorting him to repatriate himself, with a sonnet corresponding in the rhymes. Michelangelo would willingly have left Rome, but he was so weary and aged that although, as will be told below, he was determined to go back, while the spirit was willing, the flesh was weak, and that kept him in Rome. It happened in June of the year 1557, he having made a model for the vault that was to cover the apse, which was being built of travertine in the chapel of the king, that from his not being able to go there, as he had been wont, an error arose, in that the compomaestro took the measurements over the whole body of the vault with one single center, whereas there should have been a great number. And Michelangelo, as the friend and confidant of Vasari, sent him designs by his own hand, and with these words written at the foot of two of them, quote, "The center marked with red was used by the campo maestro over the body of the whole vault. Then, when he began to pass to the half circle, which is at the summit of the vault, he became aware of the error which that the center was producing, as may be seen here in the design marked in black. With this error, the vault has gone so far forward that we have to displace a great number of stones, for in that vault there is being placed no brickwork, but all travertine, and the diameter of the circle, without the cornice that borders it, is 22 palms. This error, after I had made an exact model, as I do of everything, has been caused by my not being able, on account of my old age, to go there often. So that, whereas I believe that the vault was now finished, it will not be finished all this winter, and if it were possible to die of shame and grief, I should not be alive now. I pray you account to the Duke for my not being at this moment in Florence." Close quote. And continuing in the other design, where he had drawn the plan, he said this, quote, "Messer Giorgio, to the end that it may be easier to understand the difficulty of the vault by observing its rise from the level of the ground, let me explain that I have been forced to divide it into 3 vaults, corresponding to the windows below, divided by the pilasters. And you see that they go pyramidically into the center of the summit of the vault, as also do the base and sides of the same. It was necessary to regulate them with an infinite number of centers, and there are in them so many changes in various directions from point to point that no fixed rule can be maintained. And the circles and squares that come in the midst of their deepest parts have to diminish and increase in so many directions, and to go to so many points that it is a difficult thing to find the true method. Nevertheless, having the model, such as I make for everything, they should have never have committed so great an error as to seek to regulate with one single center all those 3 shells. Whence it has come about that we have been obliged with shame and loss to pull down, as we are still doing, a great number of stones. The vault, with its sections and hewn stonework, is all of travertine, like all the rest below, a thing not customary in Rome." Close quote. Michelangelo was excused by Duke Cosimo, hearing of these misfortunes, from coming to Florence, the Duke saying to him that his contentment and the continuation of San Pietro were more dear to him than anything in the world, and that he should rest at peace. Whereupon Michelangelo wrote to Vasari on the same sheet in which he thanked the Duke to the rest of his power and knowledge for such kindness, saying, quote, "God gave me grace that I may be able to serve him with this my poor person, for my memory and my brain are gone to await him elsewhere." Close quote. The date of this letter was August in the year 1557. Thus, when Michelangelo learned that the Duke esteemed his life and his honor more than he did himself, who so revered him, all these things and many more that it is not necessary to mention, we have in our possession written in his hand. Michelangelo, by this time, was reduced to a feeble condition, and it was evident that little was being done in San Pietro, now that he had carried on a great part of the frieze of the windows within, and of the double columns without, which curve above the great round cornice, where the cupola is said to be placed, as will be related. And he was exhorted and urged by his greatest friends, such as the Cardinal of Carpi, Messer Donato Gionatti, Francesco Bandini, Tommaso de Cavalieri, and Lotino, that, since he saw the delay in the raising of the cupola, he should at least make a model of it. He stayed many months without making up his mind to this, but in the end he made a beginning, and then little by little constructed a small model in clay, from which, as an example, and from the plans and profiles that he had drawn, it might be possible afterward to make a larger one of wood. This, having made a beginning with it, he caused to be constructed in little more than a year by Maestro Giovanni Francese, with much study and pains, and he made it on such a scale that the smaller portions of the models, measured by the old Roman palm, corresponded with complete exactness to those of the large work, he having finished with diligence in that model all the members of columns, bases, capitals, doors, windows, cornices, projections, and likewise every least thing knowing that in such a work no less should be done, for in all Christendom, nay, in all the world, there is not to be found or seen any fabric more ornate or more grand. And I cannot but think that, if we have given up time by noting smaller things, it is even more useful, and also our duty, to describe this manner of design for building the structure of this tribune with the form, order, and method that Michelangelo thought to give it. Wherefore, with such brevity as we may, we will give a simple description of it, to the end that, if it should ever be the fate of this work, which God forbid, to be disturbed by the envy and malice of presumptuous persons after the death of Michelangelo, even as we have seen it disturbed up to the present during his lifetime, these, my writings, such as they may be able to assist the faithful who are to be the executors of the mind of that rare man, and also to restrain the malignant desires of those who may seek to alter it, and so at one and the same time assist, delight, and open the minds of those beautiful intellects that are the friends of this profession and regard it as their joy. I must begin by saying that according to this model, made under the direction of Michelangelo, I find that in the great work the whole space within the tribune will be 186 palms, speaking of its width from wall to wall, above the great cornice of the travertine, which curves in a round in interior, resting on the 4 great double piers that rise from the ground with their capitals carved in the Corinthian order, accompanied by their architrave, frieze, and cornice, likewise of travertine, which great cornice, curving right round over the great niches, rest supported upon the 4 great arches of the first part of the tribune, the rise of which commences in a basement of travertine with a platform 6 palms broad where one can walk. And this basement curves in a round in the manner of a wall, and its thickness is 33 palms and 11 inches, the height to the cornice 11 palms and 10 inches. The cornice is over it about 8 palms, and its projection 6.5 palms. Into this basement you enter, in order to ascend the tribune, by 4 entrances that are over the arches of the niches, and the thickness of the basement is divided into 3 parts. That on the inner side is 15 palms, that on the outer side is 11 palms, and that in the center is 7 palms and 11 inches, which make up the thickness of 33 palms and 11 inches. This space in the center is hollow and serves as a passage, which is 2 squares in height and curves in a continuous round with a barrel-shaped vault. And in line with the 4 entrances are 8 doors, each of which rises in 4 steps, one of them leading to the level platform of the cornice of the first basement, 6 palms and a half in breadth, and another leading to the inner cornice that curves round the tribune, 8 palms and 3/4 broad, on which platforms, by each door, you can walk conveniently both within and without the edifice, and from one entrance to another in a curve of 201 palms, so that, the sections being 4, the whole circuit can be 804 palms. We now have to ascend from the level of this basement, upon which rest the columns and pilasters, and which forms the frieze of windows within all the way round, being 14 palms and 1 inch in height, and around it, on the outer side, there is at the foot a short order of cornice work, and so also at the top, which does not project more than 10 inches, and all of travertine. And so, in the thickness of the third part, above that on the inner side, which we have described as 15 palms thick, there is made in every quarter section a staircase, 1/2 of which ascends in one direction, and the second half in another, the width being 4 palms and a quarter. And this staircase leads to the level of the columns. Above this level there begins to rise, in line with the solid parts of the basement, 18 large piers, all of travertine, each adorned with 2 columns on the outer side and pilasters on the inner, as will be described below, and between the piers are left the spaces where there are able to be all the windows that are to give light to the tribune. These piers, on the sides pointing toward the central point of the tribune, are 36 palms in extent, and on the front sides 19.5. Each of them, on the outer side, has 2 columns, the lowest dado of which is 8 palms and 3/4 broad and 1 palm and a half height. The base of 5 palms and 8 inches broad and 1 palm and a half high. The base of 5 palms and 8 inches broad and palms and 11 inches high. The shaft of the column 43.5 palms high, 5 palms and 6 inches thick at the foot, and 4 palms and 9 inches at the top. The Corinthian capital 6 palms and a half high, with the crowns of moldings and 9 palms. Of these columns, 3/4 are to be seen, and the other quarter is merged into the corner with the accompaniment of the half of a pilaster that makes a salient angle on the inner side. And this is accompanied in the central inner space by the opening of an arched door 5 palms wide and 13 palms and 5 inches high, from the summit of which to the capitals of the pilasters and columns there is a filling of solid masonry, serving as a connection with 2 other pilasters that are similar to those that form a salient angle beside the columns. These 2 pilasters correspond to the others and adorn the size of 16 windows that go right round the tribune, each with a light 12 palms and a half wide and about 22 palms high. These windows are to be adorned on the outer side with varied architraves 2 palms and 3/4 high, and on the inner side, they are to be adorned with orders likewise varied, with pediments and 3/4 rounds, and they are wide without and more narrow within, and so also they are sloped away at the foot of the inner side, so that they may give light over the frieze and cornice. Each of them is bordered by 2 flat pilasters that correspond in height to the columns without, so that there come to be 36 columns without and 36 pilasters within, over which pilasters is the architrave, which is 4 palms and 3/4 in height, the frieze 4.5, and the cornice 4 2/3, with a projection of 5 palms, and above this is to go a range of balusters, so that one may be able to walk all the way around there with safety. And in order that it may be possible to climb conveniently from the level where the columns begin, another staircase ascends in the same line within the thickness of the part that is 15 palms wide, in the same manner and of the same width, with 2 branches, or ascends all the way up to the summit of the columns, with their capitals, architraves, friezes, and cornices, insomuch that, without obstructing the light of the windows, these stairs pass at the top into a spiral staircase of the same breadth, which finally reaches the level where the turning of the tribune is to begin. All this order, distribution, and ornamentation is so well varied, commodious, rich, durable, and strong, and serves so well to support the 2 vaults of the cupola, that is to be turned upon it, that it is a very ingenious thing, and is all so well considered and then executed in masonry, that there is nothing to be seen by the eyes of one who has knowledge and understanding that is more pleasing, more beautiful, or wrought with greater mastery, both on account of the binding together and the mortising of the stones, and because it has in it every part strength and eternal life, and also because of the great judgment wherewith he contrived to carry away the rain-water by many hidden channels, and finally because he brought it to such perfection that all other fabrics that have been built and seem up to the present day appear as nothing in comparison with the grandeur of this one. And it has been a very great loss that those whose duty it was did not put all their power into the undertaking, for the reason that, before death took away from us that rare man, we should have seen that beautiful and terrible structure already raised. Up to this point has Michelangelo carried the masonry of the work, and it only remains to make a beginning with the vaulting of the tribune, of which, since the model has come down to us, we shall proceed to describe the design that he has left to the end, and it may be carried out. He turned the curve of this vault on 3 points that make a triangle in this manner: A, B, and beneath C. The point C, which is the lowest, is the principal one, wherewith he turned the first half circle of the tribune, with which he gave the form, height, and breadth of this vault, which he ordered to be built entirely of bricks well baked and fired, laid herringbone fashion. This shell he makes 4 palms and a half thick, and as thick at the top as at the foot, and leaving beside it, in the center, a space 4 palms and a half wide at the foot, which is to serve for the ascent of the stairs that are to lead to the lantern, rising from the platform of the cornice where there are balusters. The arch of the interior of the other shell, which is to be wider at the foot and narrower at the top, is turned on the point marked B, and the thickness of the shell at the foot is 4 palms and a half. And the last arch, which is to be turned in order to make the exterior of the cupola wider at the foot and narrowing towards the top, is to be raised on the point marked A, which arch turned, there remains at the top of the hollow space of the interior for the ascent of the stairs, which are 8 palms high, so that one may climb them upright, and the thickness of that shell comes to diminish little by little, insomuch that, being as before 4 palms and a half at the foot, it decreases at the top to 3 palms and a half. And the outer shell comes to be so well bound to the inner shell with bonds and with the stairs, that the one supports the other, while of the 8 parts into which the fabric is divided at the base, the 4 over the arches are left hollow, in order to put less weight upon the arches, and the other 4 are bound and chained together with bonds upon the piers, so that the structures may have everlasting life. The stairs in the center, between one shell and the other, are constructed in this form. From the level where the springing of the vault begins, they rise in each of the 4 sections, and each ascends from 2 entrances, the stairs intersecting one another in the form of an X, until they have covered the half of the arch marked C on the upper side of the shell, when having ascended straight up the half of that arch, the remaining space is then easily climbed circle after circle and step after step in a direct line, until finally one arrives at the eye of the cupola, where the rise of the lantern begins, around which, in accord with the diminution of the compartments that spring above the piers, there is a smaller range of double pilasters and windows, similar to those that are constructed in the interior, as will be described below. Over the first great cornice within the tribune, there begin, at the foot of the compartments for the recesses that are in the vault of the tribune, which are formed by 16 projecting ribs. These at the foot are as broad as the breadth of the 2 pilasters, which at the lower end border each window below the vault of the tribune, and they rise diminishing pyramidically as far as the eye of the lantern. At the foot they rest on pedestals of the same breadth and 12 palms high. And these pedestals rest upon the level platform of the cornice, which goes in a circle right round the tribune. Above this, in the recessed spaces between the ribs, there are 8 large ovals, each 29 palms high, and over them a number of straight-sided compartments that are wider at the foot and narrower at the top, and 24 palms high. And then, the ribs drawing together, there comes above each straight-sided compartment a round 14 palms high, so that there comes to be 8 ovals, 8 straight-sided compartments, and 8 rounds, each range forming recesses that grow more shallow in succession. The ground of all these displays extraordinary richness, For Michelangelo intended to make the ribs and the ornaments of the said ovals, straight-sided compartments, and rounds, all corniced in travertine. It remains for us to make mention of the surface and adornment of the arch on that side of the vault where the roofing is to go, which begins to rise from a base 25 palms and a half high, which has at the root a basement that has a projection of 2 palms, as have the crowning moldings at the top. The covering or roofing, which he proposed to cover it, is of lead, such as covers the roof of the old San Pietro at the present day, and is divided into 16 sections from one solid base to another, each base beginning where the 2 columns end, which are one on either side of it. In each of these sections in the center, he made 2 windows to give light to the inner space where the ascent of the stairs is, between the 2 shells, so that in all they are 32. These, by means of brackets that support a quarter round, he made projecting from the roof in such a manner as to protect the lofty and novel viewpoint from the rain. In a line with the center of the solid base between each 2 columns, above which was the crowning cornice, sprang a rib, 1 to each, wider at the foot and narrower at the top, in all 16 ribs, 5 palms broad, in the center of each of which was a quadrangular channel 1 palm and a half wide, within which it is formed an ascension of steps about 1 palm high, by which to ascend or descend between the platform at the foot and the summit where the lantern begins. These are to be built of travertine and constructed with mortisings, to the end that the joints may be protected against water and ice during times of rain. The design for the lantern is reduced in the same proportion as all the rest of the work, so that taking lines around the circumference, everything comes to diminish in exact accord with proportionate measurements. It rises as a simple temple with round columns 2 by 2, like those on the solid bases below. These have pilasters to correspond to them, and one can walk all the way round and see from the central spaces between the pilasters, where the windows are, the interior of the tribune and the church. Above this, architrave, frieze, and cornice curves in a round, projecting over each pair of columns, and over these columns, in line with them, spring some collicules, which, together with some niches that divide them, to rise to find the end of the lantern, which, beginning to draw together, grows gradually narrower for a third of its height, in the manner of a round pyramid, until it reaches the ball, upon which, as a final crown of the structure, goes the cross. Many particulars and minute details I might have mentioned, such as air holes for the protection against earthquakes, water conduits, and various lights and other conveniences, but I omit them because the work is not yet come to completion, being content to have touched on the principal parts as well as I have been able. For since every part is in existence and can be seen, it is enough to have made the brief sketch, which is a great light to him who has no knowledge of the structure. The completion of this model caused the greatest satisfaction not only to all his friends, but to all Rome, the form of the fabric having been thus settled and established. It then came to pass that Paul IV died, and after him was elected Pius IV, who, while causing the building of the little palace in the woods of the Belvedere to be continued by Piero Ligorio, who remained architect of the palace, made many gracious offers and advances to Michelangelo. The motu proprio, originally received by Michelangelo from the Paul III, and then from Julius III and Paul IV, in respect of the fabric of San Pietro, he confirmed in his favor, and he restored to him a part of the revenues and allowances taken away by Paul IV, employing him in many of his works of building. And in his time he caused the fabric of San Pietro to be carried on vigorously. He made use of Michelangelo, in particular, in preparing a design for the tomb of Marchese Marignano, his brother, which, destined to be erected at the Duomo of Milan, was allotted by His Holiness to the Chevalier Leone of Arezzo, a most excellent sculptor and much the friend of Michelangelo, the form of which tomb will be described in the proper place. At this time, the Chevalier Leone made a very lively portrait of Michelangelo in a medal, and to please him he fashioned on the reverse side a blind man led by a dog with these letters around: "I will teach you your unjust ways, and the wicked will be converted to you." And Michelangelo, since it pleased him much, presented him a model in wax of Hercules crushing the Antaeus by his own hand, with certain of his designs. Of Michelangelo we have no other portraits but two in a painting, one by the hand of Bugiardini and the other by Jacopo del Conte, one in bronze executed full relief by Danielo Ricciarelli, and this one by the Chevalier Leone, from which portraits so many copies have been made that I have seen a good number in many places in Italy and in foreign parts. The same year, Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici, son of Duke Cosimo, went to Rome to receive the hat from Pius IV, and it fell to Vasari, as his servant and familiar friend, to go with him, which Vasari went there willingly and stayed about a month in order to enjoy Michelangelo, who received him with great affection and was always with him. Vasari had taken with him, by order of His Excellency, a model in wood of the whole ducal palace of Florence, together with designs of the new apartments that had been built and painted by him, which Michelangelo desired to see both in the model and in the designs, since, being old, he was not able to see the works themselves. These works, which were abundant and well varied with different inventions and fancies, began with the castration of Uranus, and continued in stories of Saturn, Ops, Ceres, Jove, Juno, and Hercules, each room having one of these names, with the stories in various compartments, even as the other chambers and halls, which were beneath these, had the names of the heroes of the house of Medici, beginning with the older Cosimo and continuing with Lorenzo, Leo X, Clement VII, Signor Giovanni, Duke Alessandro, and Duke Cosimo, in each of which were not only the stories of their actions, but also portraits of them, of their children, and of all the ancients renowned in statesmanship, in arms, and in letters taken from the life. Of these, Vasari had written a dialogue in which he explained all the stories, the end of the whole invention, and now the fables above harmonized with the stories below, which was read to Michelangelo by Annibale Caro, and he took the greatest pleasure in it. This dialogue, when Vasari shall have more time, will be published. The result of all this was as follows. Vasari was desirous of setting his hand to the great hall, and since, as has been said elsewhere, the ceiling was low, making it stunted and wanting in lights, he had a desire to raise that ceiling. Now the Duke, which would not make up his mind to give him leave that it should be raised. Not that the Duke feared the cost, as was seen afterward, but rather the danger of raising the beams of the roof 13 braccia. However, like a man of judgment, His Excellency consented that the advice of Michelangelo should be taken, and Michelangelo, having seen in that model the hall as it then was and afterwards, all the beams having been removed and replaced by other beams with a new invention in the ceiling and walls, the same hall as it has since been made, with the invention of the stories likewise designed herein, liked it, and straightway became not a judge but a supporter, as he saw the facile method of raising the beams and the roof, and the plan for executing the whole work in a short time. Wherefore, on Vasari's return, he wrote to the Duke that he should carry out that undertaking, since it was worthy of his greatness. The same year, Duke Cosimo went to Rome with the Lady Duchess Leonora, his consort, and Michelangelo, after the Duke's arrival, went straightway to see him. The Duke, after receiving him with many endearments, caused him, out of respect for his great genius, to sit by his side, and with much familiarity talk to him of all that he had caused to be done in painting and sculpture in Florence, and also of all he was minded to have done, and in particularly of the hall. And Michelangelo again encouraged and reassured him in that matter, lamenting, since he had loved that lord, that he was not young enough to be able to serve him. His Excellency said that he had discovered the way to work porphyry, a thing which Michelangelo could not believe, and the Duke therefore sent him, as has been related in the first chapter of the Treatise on Theory, the head of Christ wrought by the sculptor Francesco del Tadda, at which he was astonished, and he visited the Duke several times the while that he stayed in Rome, to his vast satisfaction. He did the same a short time afterward, when the most illustrious Don Francesco de' Medici, the Duke's son, went there, in whom Michelangelo took such delight from the marks of regard and affection shown to him by his most illustrious Excellency, who spoke with him always cap in hand, having infinite reverence for so rare a man. And Michelangelo wrote to Vasari that it vexed him to be old and infirm, for he would have liked to do something for that lord, but he was going about trying to buy some beautiful antique to send him in Florence. Being requested at this time by the Pope for a design for the Porta Pia, Michelangelo made 3, all fantastic and most beautiful, of which the Pope chose the least costly for putting into execution, and it is now to be seen erected there with much credit to him. Perceiving the inclination of the Pope, and hoping that he would restore the other gates of Rome, he made many other designs for him, and he did the like at the request of the same pontiff in the matter of the new church of San Maria degli Angeli in the baths of Diocletian, in order to convert them into a temple for the use of Christians. A design by his hand prevailed over many others made by excellent architects, being executed with such beautiful considerations for the convenience of the Carthusian friars, who have now carried it almost to completion, that it caused his holiness and all the prelates and lords of the court to marvel at the judgment of the lovely conceptions that he had drawn, availing himself of the skeleton of those baths, out of which was seen formed a most beautiful temple, with an entrance surpassing the expectations of all the architects, from which he acquired infinite praise and honor. For that place also he designed for his holiness a cibitorium of the sacrament in bronze, cast for the most part by Maestro Jacopo Ciciliano, an excellent bronze caster, who made his works come out very delicate and fine, without any roughness, so that they can be polished with little labor, in which field he is a rare master, and gave much satisfaction to Michelangelo. The Florentine colony had often talked among themselves of giving a good beginning to the church of San Giovanni in the Strada Giulia. Finally, all the heads of these richest houses, having assembled together, they each promised to contribute in due proportion according to their means toward that fabric, insomuch that they contrived to collect a good sum of money. And then it was discussed among them whether it were better to follow the old lines or to have something new and finer. It was determined that something new should be erected on the old foundations, and finally they elected 3 men to have the charge of the fabric, who were Francesco Bandini, Uberto Ubaldini, and Tommaso de Bardi. And these requested Michelangelo for a design, recommending themselves to him on the ground that it was a disgrace to their colony to have thrown away so much money without any kind of profit, and that if his genius did not avail to finish the work, they had no other resource. He promised them to do it, and as much lovingness as he had ever shown in any work in the past, because in this his old age he readily gave his attention to sacred things, such as might rebound to the honor of God, and also from affection for his fellow Florentines, whom he loved always. Michelangelo had with him at this conference the Florentine sculptor Tiberio Calcagni, a young man very ardent to learn art, who, after going to Rome, had turned his mind to the study of architecture. Loving him, Michelangelo had given him to finish, as had been related, the Pietà in marble that he had broken, and in addition a head of Brutus in marble, with the breast considerably larger than life, to the end that he might finish it. Of this, the head alone was carved with certain most minute gradings, and he had taken it from a portrait of Brutus, cut in a very ancient cornelian that was in the possession of Signor Giuliano Ceserino, which Michelangelo was doing for Cardinal Ridolfi at the entreaty of Messer Donato Gionati, his very dear friend, and it is a rare work. Michelangelo, then, in matters of architecture, not being able by reason of old age to draw any more, or to make accurate lines, was making use of Tiberio, because he was very gentle and discreet, and thus, desiring to avail himself of him in such an undertaking, he laid on him the charge of tracing the plan of the site and the above-named church. That plan having been traced and carried straight away to Michelangelo, at a time when it was not thought that he was doing anything, he gave him to understand through Tiberio that he had carried out their wishes, and finally showed them 5 of temples, which having seen, they marveled. He said to them that they should choose one that pleased them, and they, not wishing to do it, left the matter to his judgment. But he insisted that they should decide of their own free will. Wherefore they all with one accord chose the richest. This having been adopted, Michelangelo said to them that if they carried such a design to completion, neither the Greeks nor the Romans ever in their times executed such a work. Words that neither before nor afterward ever issued from the mouth of Michelangelo, for he was very modest. Finally, it was agreed that the direction should be left entirely to Michelangelo, and that the labor of executing the work should fall to Tiberio, with all of which they were content, Michelangelo promising them that Tiberio would serve them excellently well. And so, having given the ground plan to Tiberio to be drawn accurately and with correct measurements, he drew for him the profiles both within and without, and bade them make a model of clay, teaching him the way to execute it so that it might stand firm. In 10 days, Tiberio executed a model of 8 palms, which much pleased the whole Florentine colony, so that afterward they caused to be made from it a model of wood, which is now in the residence of the consuls of that colony. A thing as rare in its beauty, richness, and great variety as any temple that has ever been seen. A beginning was made with the building, and 5,000 crowns were spent. But the funds for that fabric failed, and so it was abandoned, at which Michelangelo felt very great displeasure. he obtained for Tiberio the commission to finish under his direction at San Maria Maggiore a chapel begun for Cardinal Santafiore, but it was left unfinished on account of the death of the cardinal, of Michelangelo, and of Tiberio himself, the death of which young man was a very great loss. Michelangelo had been 17 years in the fabric of San Pietro, and several times the deputies had tried to remove him from that position, but they had not succeeded, and they were seeking to oppose him in every matter, now with one vexatious pretext, and now with another, hoping that out of weariness, being now so old that he could do no more, he would retire before them. It happened in those days that Cesare da Casteldurante, which had been the overseer, died, and Michelangelo, to the end of that fabric might not suffer, sent there Luigi Gaeta, who was too young but very competent, until he should find a man after his desire. The deputies, some of whom had many times made efforts to place there Nanni di Baccio di Biggio, who was always urging them and promising great things, in order to be able to disturb the affairs of the fabric at their pleasure, sent Luigi Gaeta away, which, having heard, Michelangelo was in anger, would no longer show himself at the fabric, whereupon they began to give out that he could do no more, that it was necessary to give him a substitute, and that he himself had said that he did not much wish to be embroiled any longer with San Pietro. All this came to the ears of Michelangelo, who sent Daniele Ricciarelli of Volterra to Bishop Ferentino, one of the superintendents, who had said to the Cardinal of Capri that Michelangelo had told one of his servants that he did not wish to be mixed up with the fabric any longer. And Daniele said that this was by no means Michelangelo's desire. Ferentino complained that Michelangelo would not make his conception known, adding that it would be well for him to provide a substitute, and that he would have gladly accepted Daniele. And with this Michelangelo appeared to be content. Thereupon, Ferentino, having had the deputies informed in the name of Michelangelo that they now had a substitute, presented not Daniele, but in his place Nanni di Baccio Biggio, who came in and was accepted by the superintendents. Before very long he gave orders to make a scaffolding of wood from the side of the Pope's stables, where the hill is, to rise above the great recesses that is turned toward that side, and cause some stout beams of fir to be cut, saying that too many ropes were consumed in drawing up the materials, and that it was better to raise them above by his method. Which, having heard, Michelangelo went straight to the Pope, who was on the Piazza del Campidoglio, and made so much noise that His Holiness made him go at once into a room, where he said, "Holy Father, there has been appointed as my substitute by the deputies a man of whom I know nothing. But if they are convinced, and also your Holiness, that I am no longer the proper man, I will return to rest in Florence, where I will enjoy the favors of that great Duke who has so long desired me, and will finish my life in my own house. I therefore beg your gracious leave." The Pope was vexed at this, and consoling him with kind words, ordained that he should come to speak with him on the following day at the Araceli. There, having caused the deputies of the fabric to be assembled together, he desired to be informed of the reasons of what had happened. Whereupon their answers was that the fabric were going to ruin, and that errors were being made in it, which having heard not to be the truth, the Pope commanded Signor Gabriel Serbelloni that he should go to see the fabric for himself, and that Nani, who was making these assertions, should show it to him. Well, this was carried out, and Signor Gabriel found that the whole story was a malicious slander, and not the truth. Wherefore Nani was dismissed from that fabric with no very flattering words in the presence of many lords, being so reproached that by his fault the bridge of Santa Maria fell into ruin, and that at Ancona, seeking to do great things at little cost in the matter of cleaning out the harbor, he filled it up more in one day than the sea had done in 10 years. Such was the end of Nani in the fabric of San Pietro. For that work, Michelangelo for 17 years attended constantly to nothing but to establishing it securely with directions, doubting on account of those vigorous persecutions, lest it might come to be changed after his death, so that at the present day it is strong enough to allow the vaulting to be raised with perfect security. Thus it has been seen that God, who is the protector of the good, defended him as long as he lived, and worked for the benefit of the fabric and for the defense and master until his death. Moreover, Pius IV, living after him, commanded the superintendence of the fabric that nothing of what Michelangelo had directed should be changed, and that even with greater authority his successor, Pius V, caused it to be carried out, who, lest disorder should arise, insisted that the designs made by Michelangelo should be carried out into execution with the utmost fidelity, so that when the architects Piero Ligorio and Jacopo Vignuola were in charge of it, and Piero wished presumptuously to disturb and alter those directions, he was removed with little honor from that fabric, and only Vignuola remained. Finally, that pontiff, being full of zeal, no less for the honor of the fabric of San Pietro than for the Christian religion, in the year 1565, when Vasari went to kiss the feet of His Holiness, and in that year, 1566, when he was again summoned, nothing was discussed save the means to ensure the observing of the designs left by Michelangelo. And His Holiness, in order to obviate all chances of disorder, commanded Vasari that he should go with Messer Guglielmo Sangalletti, the private treasurer of His Holiness, to seek out Bishop Ferentino, the head of the superintendence of San Pietro, with orders from the pontiff that he should listen to all suggestions and records of importance that Vasari might import to him, to the end that no words of any malignant and presumptuous person might ever cause to be disturbed any line or order left by the excellent genius of Michelangelo of happy memory. And at that interview was presented Messer Giovan Battista Altoviti, who was much the friend of Vasari and of these arts. And Ferentino, having heard a discourse that Vasari made to him, readily accepted every record and promised to observe and to cause to be observed with the utmost fidelity that fabric, every order, design that Michelangelo had left for that purpose, and, in addition, to be the protector, defender, and preserver of the labors of that great man. But to return to Michelangelo, I must relate that about a year before his death, Vasari secretly prevailed upon Duke Cosimo de' Medici to persuade the Pope by means of Messer Averardo Serristori, his ambassador, that since Michelangelo was much reduced, a diligent watch should be kept on those who were about him to take care of him, or who visited him at his house, and that in the event of some sudden accident happening to him, such as might well happen to an old man, he should make arrangements for his property, designs, cartoons, models, money, and all his other possessions at the time of his death, to be set down in an inventory and placed in security for the sake of the fabric of San Pietro, so that if there were things pertaining to that fabric, and also to the sacristy, library, and facade of San Lorenzo, they might not be taken away, as is often wont to happen. And in the end, all this being duly carried out, such diligence had its reward. Leonardo, the nephew of Michelangelo, was desirous to go during the coming Lent to Rome, as one who guessed that he was now come to the end of his life. And at this Michelangelo was content. When, therefore, he fell sick of a slow fever, he straightway caused Danielo to write to Leonardo that he should come. But the illness grew worse. Although Messer Ferradigo Donati was his physician, and his other attendants were about him, and with perfect consciousness he made his will in 3 sentences, leaving his soul into the hands of God, his body to the earth, and his substance to his nearest relatives, and enjoining on his friends that, at his passing from this life, they should recall to him the agony of Jesus Christ. And so at the 23rd hour of the 17th day of February, in the year 1563, after the Florentine reckoning, which, according to the Roman, would be 1564, he breathed his last to go to a better life. Michelangelo was much inclined to the labors of art, seeing that everything, however difficult, succeeded with him, he having had from nature a genius very apt and ardent in these most noble arts of design. Moreover, in order to be entirely perfect, innumerable times he made anatomical studies, dissecting men's bodies in order to see the principles of their construction and the concatenation of the bones, muscles, veins, and nerves, the various movements and all the postures of the human body, and not of men only, but also of animals, particularly of horses, which last he had delighted to keep. Of all these he desired to learn the principles and laws insofar as touched his art, and this knowledge he so demonstrated in the work that fell to him to handle, that those who attended to no other study than this do not know more. So he executed his works, whether with the brush or with the chisel, that they are almost inimitable, and he gave to his labors, as has been said, such art and grace and a loveliness of such a kind that, be it said without offense to any, he surpassed and vanquished the architects, having been able to wrest things out of the greatest difficulties with such facility that they do not appear wrought with effort, although whoever draws his works after him finds enough in imitating them. The genius of Michelangelo was recognized in his lifetime, and not, as happens to many, after death. For it has been seen that Julius II, Leo X, Clement VII, Paul III, Julius III, Paul IV, and Pius V, all supreme pontiffs, always wished to have him near them. And also, as is known, Suleiman, Emperor of the Turks, Francis of Valois, King of France, the Emperor Charles V, and the Signora of Venice, and finally, and has been related, Duke Cosimo de' Medici, all offering him honorable salaries for no other reason but to avail themselves of his great genius. This does not happen to save men of great worth, such as he was, and it is evident and well known that all these 3 arts were so perfected in him that it is not found that among persons, ancient or modern, in all the many years that the sun has been twirling around, God has granted this to any other but Michelangelo. He had imagination of such a kind, and so perfect, and the things conceived by him in idea were such that often, though not being able to express with the hands conceptions so terrible and grand, he abandoned his works, nay, destroyed many of them, and I know that a little before he died, he burned a great number of designs, sketches, and cartoons made with his own hand, to the end that no one might see the labors endured by him and his methods of trying his genius, and that he might not appear less than perfect. Of such I have some by his hand, found in Florence and placed in my book of drawings, from which, although the greatness of that brain is seen in them, it is evident that when he wished to bring forth Minerva from the head of love, he had to use a Vulcan's hammer. Thus he used to make his figures in the proportions of 9, 10, and even 12 heads, seeking naught else but that in putting them all together there should be a certain harmony of grace in the whole, which nature does not present, saying that it was necessary to have the compasses in the eyes and not in the hand, because the hands work and the eye judges, which method he also used in architecture. No one should think it strange that Michelangelo delighted in solitude, he having been one who was enamored of his art, which claims a man, with all his thoughts, for himself alone. Moreover, it is necessary that he who wishes to attend to her studies should shun society, and while attending to the considerations of art, he never alone or without thoughts. And those who attributed it to caprice and eccentricity are wrong, because he who wishes to work well must withdraw himself from all cares and vexations, since art demands contemplation, solitude, and ease of life, and will not suffer the mind to wander. For all this he prized the friendship of many great persons and of learned and ingenious men at convenient times, and those he maintained. Thus the great Cardinal Ippolito de' Medici loved him greatly, and having heard that a Turkish horse that he possessed pleased Michelangelo because of its beauty, it was sent as a present to him by the liberality of that lord, with 10 mules laden with fodder and a serving man to attend to it. And Michelangelo accepted it willingly. The illustrious Cardinal Pole was much his friend, Michelangelo being enamored of his goodness and his talents, also Cardinal Farnese and Santa Croce, which later afterwards became Pope Marcellus, Cardinal Ridolfi, Cardinal Maffeo, Monsignor Bembo, Carpi, and other cardinals, bishops, and prelates, whom it is not necessary to name. Others were Monsignor Cardinal Claudio Tolome, the magnificent Messer Ottaviano de' Medici, his gossip, whose son he held at baptism, and Messer Bindo Altoviti, to whom he presented that cartoon of the chapel, in which Noah, drunk with wine, is derided by some of his sons, and his nakedness covered by the 2 others. Messer Lorenzo Ridolfi, Messer Annibale Caro, and Giovan Francesco Lottini of Volterra. But infinitely more than any of the others he loved Messer Tommaso de' Cavalieri, a Roman gentleman, for whom, being a young man and much inclined to these arts, he made to the end that he might learn to draw many most superb drawings of divinely beautiful heads, designed in black and red chalk. And then he drew for him a Ganymede rapt to heaven by Jove's eagle, a Tityus with a vulture devouring his heart, the chariot of the sun falling into Python into the Po, and a bacchanal of children, which are all in themselves most rare things, and drawings the like of which have never been seen. Michelangelo made a life-size portrait of Messer Tommaso in a cartoon, and neither before nor afterward did he take the portrait of anyone, because he abhorred executing a resemblance to the living subject unless it were of extraordinary beauty. These drawings, on account of the great delight that Messer Tommaso took in them, were the reason that he afterward obtained a good number miraculous things which Michelangelo once drew for Fra Sebastiano Vinziano, who carried them into execution, and in truth he rightly measures them as relics, and he has courteously given craftsmen access to them. Of a truth, Michelangelo always placed his affection with persons noble, deserving and worthy of them, for he had true judgment and taste in all things. Messer Tommaso afterwards caused Michelangelo to make many designs for friends, such as that of the picture for Cardinal de Sezes, wherein is Our Lady receiving the Annunciation from the angel, a novel thing which was afterward executed in colors by Marcello Mantovano and placed in the marble chapel which that cardinal caused to be built in the church of the Pace at Rome. So also with another Annunciation colored likewise by the hand of Marcello in a picture of the church of San Giovanni Laterno, the design of which belongs to Duke Cosimo de' Medici, having been presented after Michelangelo's death by his nephew Leonardo Buonarroti to His Excellency, who cherishes it as a jewel, together with a Christ praying in the garden, and many other designs, sketches, and cartoons by the hand of Michelangelo, and likewise the statue of Victory with a captive beneath, 5 braccia in height, and 4 captives in the rough, which serve to teach us how to carve figures from the marble by a method secure from any chance of spoiling the stone, which method is as follows. You take a figure in wax or some other solid material and lay it horizontally in a vessel of water, which water being by its nature flat and level at the surface, you raise the said figure little by little from the level, so that it comes about that the more salient parts are revealed, while the lower parts, those namely on the underside of the figure, remain hidden, until in the end it all comes into view. In the same manner must figures be carved out of marble with a chisel, first laying bare the more salient parts, and then, little by little, the lower parts. And this method may be seen to have been followed by Michelangelo in the above-captioned captives, which His Excellency wishes to be used as exemplars for his academicians.